Good evening, everyone. Today, I will be doing a prediction for this year 5105 GC N-Level Science Chemistry paper. I hope my sharing will benefit candidates who are preparing for this exam. What was tested in the multiple choice? Last year, these are the topics tested in the multiple choice section. The first question was paper chromatography, followed by a question on chemical bonding and structure, where candidates need to relate physical properties to the chemical bonding and structure of substances. Atomic structure, element, compound, and mixture, where they need to differentiate between element, compound, and mixture. Mole calculation is tested in this paper as well. Reactions of acids, where candidates need to be very familiar with the reactions of acid with reactive metal, acid with metal carbonate, and acid with base. Students or candidates who did this paper should be familiar with acids and its relationship to pH and the neutralization reaction concept. Students need to be familiar with the periodic table, what is group and period, and relationship to the number of valence electrons. They also need to know what is meant by stable electronic configuration and inertness, where they need to choose the option which shows a noble gas. Reactions of metal is an important concept that students must grasp to do well for the paper. Students need to answer a question on the structure of alloy, conditions of rusting, the blast furnace, knowing what happened in a blast furnace, collection of gases, and some knowledge on drying agent. Under organic chemistry, students were tested on the fractions in petroleum and separation of petroleum using fractional distillation. There are about 2 questions in total tested on combustions of alkanes, reactions of aqueous bromine with alkenes, substitution reactions of alkanes. Under the topic of air, the sources of pollutants was tested. In the structured question, students were required to interpret temperature reading, a very simple question to write down the temperature reading recorded on the thermometer, inferring the physical state based on the melting and boiling point, arrangement of particles in solid, electrical conductivity of ionic compound in the solid or molten state, and the significance of adding excess reagent. Students were also required to show a diagram that show filtration setup to separate the insoluble salt from the soluble product. Gas syringe is used to collect gases as well as to measure the volume of gas. Every year, plotting of graph is one of the popular skills that will be tested in the N-level chemistry paper. Likewise, last year paper, this was tested. Diatomic molecules, where students need to know the definition. Halogens, the color and state at room temperature, and be familiar with the displacement reactions of halogens. There was a question that was a bit unusual in the structured portion, where they need to understand that the heat release in the reaction between group 1 metals, which is potassium in the example, with water is sufficient to boil water, which explains why steam was formed, because the heat released from the reaction was sufficient to boil the liquid water into steam. Students were tested on their knowledge on reactivity series, where they need to compare the metals with hydrogen. Metals above hydrogen in the series will be able to react with acid. Metals below hydrogen were unable to react with acid. The benefit of recycling was tested also. For last year, dot and cross diagram of the organic molecule was tested. And the knowledge of the test for carbon dioxide, the color change of the universal indicator, and knowledge on incomplete combustion of hydrocarbons. So in all, last year paper, these are the popular topics tested: kinetic particle theory, collection of gases, separation techniques, elements, compounds and mixture, atomic structure, chemical bonding and structure, mole calculations, periodic table, metals, in particular alloy, reactions of metal, organic chemistry. Almost all the learning outcomes were tested. Air, with a focus on the sources, and the effects of the pollutant were actually not tested heavily. They tested on the reactions and the sources of the pollutants, carbon monoxide, as well as oxides of nitrogen, and knowledge on acid and bases, which focus more on the pH, the indicator, and the reactions of acids. What are my predictions for this year paper? N-level chemistry doesn't cover a lot of topics compared to the O-level combined science and the O-level pure chemistry. So it's actually more difficult to predict what will come out compared to the pure chem, due to the limited number of topics and LO. So I won't be able to pinpoint exactly what will come because there could be repeated questions. However, I noticed that the type of questions or the topics tested were quite similar to the O-level paper, both combined and pure. The three papers seem to be aligned in some way. So, when I did this, I realized that there was some overlapping between the pure chem and the N-level chemistry in terms of the topics. Of course, the topics tested were much less in N-level chem. The scope is very limited. So I will advise all the students to study the entire syllabus, to know every single one, because they will repeat. They will. Okay, some questions were actually repeated from past year paper, if you have noticed. Okay, now, so kinetic particle theory is the favorite. Last year, the temperature interpretation was tested and some questions on arrangement and motion, but I do think that it will still come out. But do also focus on temperature time graph that may be tested. So pay attention to temperature time graph, arrangement and motion of particles also, both solid, liquid, and gases. I'm not very sure which one will come out. Just prepare for all. And some questions related to it, like even temperature interpretation, also need to know. Separation technique is also quite popular. Paper chromatography appear in the multiple choice and not the structure. So it may come out in the structure this time around with more questions. So do know how to interpret what is meant by pure substance and the precautions to take note when doing paper chromatogram. Very important. And the interpretation. What does the result say? So these are the type of questions that will come out for paper chromatography. And also other separation technique, like those that were not tested last year. Simple distillation, crystallization, evaporation, dryness, sublimation, the rest of it. Do pay attention to collection of gas. It seems to be quite popular, although it could be just a 1-mark question. Dot and cross diagram likely to come out again or may not come out. This time round, it may not be the organic molecule. It could be carbon dioxide, water, or other inorganic molecules that were tested before. There'll be some questions, but I believe they do test, but I believe that it may not be on a large scale this time around. It will be a smaller scale chemical bonding and structure. So less from here. More calculation will always be tested every year, but definitely there'll be a question on equation or even ionic equations. Do pay attention to that, as well as writing the state symbol and some mole calculations where you need to convert mass to mole or mole to mass, etc., or just calculate the MR of the molecule or formula mass of the ionic compound. There is not much question on salt preparation, except for one that talk about using filtration to separate the insoluble product from the soluble substance. So there will be more questions on salt preparation, just like what I have mentioned, the pure chem prediction. You can refer to that video on pure chem. Salt preparation is likely to come out, but I'm not very sure whether they will have titration or the reaction of excess metal or carbonate or base with acid, or titration, either one of it. Or there will be some questions on solubility and insolubility of salts. All right. Some knowledge in acid and bases, though it was heavily tested last year. They may ask a question they asked before, like what is the ion or what is the formula of the ion responsible for acidic property? Answer is H+ ion. Or what is the formula of the ion or ion responsible for the property of alkaline property? Answer is OH-. Okay, so be prepared for that. Or they may ask you to construct equation to show the reaction of acid with base. There could also be a question on reaction of ammonium salt with base, which was not tested last year. So do pay attention to that. Ammonium salt with base. Okay. Sorry, I accidentally exit the slide. So other than that, we have periodic table trends. Group 1 metal reactions could be tested, or group 7, or even talking about noble gas, their users. Group 1, they may want you to compare the reactivity of metal down the group. Okay, or other periodic table trends like, so instead of asking about how group is related to number of valence electron, they may ask you, hey, how is period related to number of occupied electron shell? All right. Or they may ask a question on, okay, across the period, what is the change in property? So it's changed from metallic to non-metallic. Or they may ask something about acidic, basic, and photonic. Do pay attention to types of oxides. It's not tested last year. Types of oxides. Group 7. Group 7. Do pay attention to displacement as well as the color. Yeah. Study again. Okay. Don't leave those out. Yeah. So types of oxides, yes. Let me emphasize on this. Types of oxide, very important. Make sure you know the example. And also metals, every single LO, including a blast furnace, do study that as well. It may come out as 1 mark question. Air, quite important. Organic chemistry, everything. So that's all. I really find it very difficult to pinpoint exactly what they will focus on due to the limited scope. And also the number of marks they gave is only 50 marks. So just try your best. I think it will be sufficient to just study the 10-year series to know the different types of questions they will ask. And also for preparation of salts, I reiterate again that you need to know the step, but they will not ask you to state every single step in the preparation, like say titration, maybe half of it. Yeah, so but you need to know, because you don't know which half they will ask. So you just get ready. And knowing the reagent to prepare for salt. For example, they give you the salt as let me think. Let's say copper 2 sulfate. Okay, so they may ask you what are the suitable reagent to prepare this. You cannot choose copper and sulfuric acid because copper is unreactive metal. So you have to choose maybe like copper 2 oxide, copper 2 hydroxide, copper 2 carbonate, react with sulfuric acid to produce a copper 2 sulfate. But when you mention copper 2 sulfate, do not just say copper 2 sulfate, must say aqueous copper 2 sulfate. Then for the solid, right, you just have to mention the name. And for the acid, you must say dilute sulfuric acid, dilute hydrochloric acid. Okay, please do not forget that. If it's alkaline, right, like sodium hydroxide, it's not enough. You must say aqueous sodium hydroxide. All right, so that's about it. I hope my advice and my tips for you will help you, and wish you all the best in your preparation for the N-level paper. Thank you.